Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Duffy, and welcome to this Dark Side update to a case that we have been following for a long, long time. And, of course, this is the Mackenzie Shirilla case. And this case has drawn national attention due to that Netflix documentary. And we want to take this just a step further now as we kind of look at the appeal process that's been going on. And Mackenzie Shirilla, of course, was convicted of killing her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan. Mackenzie Shirilla in 2023 was sentenced to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole for the first time coming up in 2037. The key to this was a prosecution brought out a so-called black box. You hear that a lot with airplanes, but it showed that the car Mackenzie Shirilla was driving was, in fact, going 100 miles an hour when it slammed into a building there in Strongsville. So the key part of this right now is an appeal that the new lawyers of Mackenzie Shirilla went to the Ohio Supreme Court with. For more on that, let's go to Dan DeRose, who's been working this story, and we'll find out exactly what happened yesterday. Dan.
Let's review where we're at with this case. Mackenzie Shirilla had this appeal. This first appeal said, hey, Mackenzie Shirilla suffers from a pre-existing condition where it causes her to black out. Her new attorney said the attorney during a trial barely brought it up. He didn't even secure an expert testimony. They threw that out, said tough luck. Next up, they said her chance to appeal, you get 365 days to put in an appeal. They said that, well, that deadline should be kind of fluid because they missed the deadline by 1 day because it was a leap year. This is what the Supreme Court in Ohio was considering. In that case, Mike O'Malley, the Cuyahoga County prosecutor, wrote to the Supreme Court, said this case fails to present an issue of public or great general interest. It concerns only the untimely filing of a post-conviction petition due to the mistake of counsel, her attorney. For these reasons, the state respectfully asks the court to decline to exercise jurisdiction over the appeal. What they mean by that is exercise jurisdiction. We want you not even to take up the case to determine that this is not in your jurisdiction. Here it is, just came out this afternoon from the Ohio Supreme Court. Upon consideration of the jurisdictional memoranda filed in this case, the court declines to accept jurisdiction of the appeal pursuant to the Rule 7.08. I asked our defense analyst, Tara Coleman, what does this mean? It simply means the Ohio Supreme Court says this doesn't fall under our jurisdiction. We are not going to hear this case. She is not going to get a new trial. I asked Tara Coleman. She obviously didn't work with Mackenzie on this case, but what does it feel like when you have a defendant, somebody sitting in jail for life in prison, and their appeal is denied?
In most cases, and especially in this type of case, the expectations would have been set with Mackenzie early on that this was a long shot. So I am assuming that conversations have been had with her, and that's how I would counsel my client in this particular case, because to try to get the Supreme Court of Ohio to take this narrow interpretation of a statute that's been in place for so long, that is a Hail Mary long shot, right? So while these moments are devastating, I'm assuming and hopefully it's kind of a softer blow and that maybe this outcome was expected.
Now, I asked what's next. Can she take this to the U.S. Supreme Court and try and have it appealed there? According to Tara Coleman, there has to be an issue at hand, a federal issue. So something that went wrong in the trial that is at the federal level. That just didn't happen. This was a state law. This was a state crime and a state appeal that failed. It is basically over for any hope of her getting out early.
We are joined now by our legal analyst, Tara Coleman, and our 19 News reporter, Vasi Prokos, who's been doing the heavy lifting and the reporting here, specifically when it comes to the families of the victims. And Tara, I want to start with you here. We heard some of this in the interview you did with Dan, but also on how he kind of explained where we are with this. They declined to review this appeal because they filed late, which we understand there, and there may have been a technicality. So I would imagine some people were thinking, hey, I mean, that's reasonable. There was a leap year. They didn't know, so they filed late. And then, but they basically said they lack jurisdiction, which to a non-legal minded person like myself, well, wait a minute, this is Ohio. What do you mean they lack jurisdiction? That's a little confusing to me. Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, so that timing issue is a jurisdictional issue. And so what people have to keep in mind is the decision yesterday by the Ohio Supreme Court to not hear this case, it's not on the merits, it's not on guilt or innocence or jurisdiction in the normal sense, but it's a procedural issue. And if those procedural bars are not met, that is a way for the Ohio Supreme Court to use its discretionary jurisdiction to decline to hear this appeal on that procedural error.
Okay, so when we hear the word jurisdiction, it doesn't mean it didn't happen in the state of Ohio, or it didn't happen.
It's not geography in that sense, but more of a civil procedure legal sense when we hear jurisdiction, in that context.
Okay, so what about the sense of this was filed late because of an error by that attorney? Why should that, so to speak, and affect Mackenzie Shirilla because her lawyers did a poor job there? Now that's affecting Mackenzie Shirilla. Some people are going to go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem fair to me. Explain to me why the Ohio Supreme Court did what they did.
Yeah, so our laws are in place around these procedural rules a lot to increase jurisdictional efficiency. So our Supreme Courts here, all of our courts have limited resources, right? And so these timing laws are in place for a reason. You have to abide by them or you can't get into court. Coming back to jurisdiction, right? So it does seem very unfair, but this is on the attorney.
We're going to talk about some of the other issues like the United States Supreme Court, but was this basically, and you kind of alluded to this in your talk with Dan, was this kind of a Hail Mary by these attorneys?
I would consider it a Hail Mary for sure. So being that this deadline was missed, the argument they were going into was, hey, trial transcript that starts the triggering of this clock for the 365 days doesn't mean trial transcript in the normal sense, but it means this other transcript that we needed for the appeal, and therefore we really had, months more to file it. And so they're trying to get the Ohio Supreme Court to interpret that statute in that way, which in my opinion was a long shot.
Yeah, and this is all normal stuff when somebody's convicted. I mean, these appeals start piling up, right?
It is. It's normal process. And they did a timely appeal for the direct appeal, right, which was denied. And then they were going back for what's called post-conviction relief on a different issue, and that's the deadline they missed. But yeah, this is all normal course.
And you're making a very important point that they did the direct appeal. That's the big one. That's, hey, something was wrong here in the process of all this, and that was denied.
Right. That's where you go in and say, hey, the trial court got it wrong. They didn't consider this evidence, or they allowed something in that shouldn't have been. All of those normal arguments, yes, those were made early on within the appellate timeline and were denied.
What does the legal team for Mackenzie Shirilla do now? Do they go to Mackenzie Shirilla and say, wait until 2037 and then we'll try and make your case to the parole board at that point? Or can they go back to the Ohio Supreme Court with any other issues? Do they try and go to the United States Supreme Court? What would it take at this point for them to get back in front of some type of court?
Yeah, right now they're looking at all options, and the options are slim, and any avenues are very narrow at this point. So where things are, the conviction remains intact. Her sentencing remains intact. And if I'm counsel, what I'm going to be looking for is there some constitutional issue within how this played out in the state court that could get us to the United States Supreme Court, which would be such a long shot, but I don't personally know the case well enough to know if there are any federal questions or constitutional issues, but that's where my mind is going at this point.
Would the federal be different than the state? Because my next question would be, didn't the Ohio State Supreme Court already look at this and say, no, there were no procedural issues. There was nothing based on the Constitution that we can re-rack this thing.
Right. So it's already been looked at from the merits and from Ohio civil procedure, but sometimes your constitutional rights can be hampered in a process that happens in state court. And so that's what they would be trying to find. Is the way this law was interpreted with the deadlines, and I'm just pulling things out, right?
Sure.
Is there some constitutional issue that she has a constitutional right under federal law that they could bring a question to the United States Supreme Court.
So this goes from a Hail Mary to the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, So this looks like she needs to maybe address some of the issues she's having in prison, and then go to her parole hearing in 2037. That's pretty much what it's looking like.
Yeah.
We're going to get back to Tara Coleman in just a minute. I want to turn over to Vasi now. And Vasi, you've had an opportunity to speak with the family. They were very relieved to hear all of this, obviously, because they don't want anything getting in the way of Mackenzie Shirilla spending at least until, what's the date, at least until 2037 in jail. Tell me your experiences recently here with the family.
Yeah, so I've been speaking with the sister of Dominic Russo, Christine Russo. She's, before going into trial, the family was in disbelief. They thought this was all an accident, and when it all came to light and she was found guilty, they just couldn't believe it. And with this appeal getting denied by the Ohio Supreme Court, she put out a live reaction last night because she's had this podcast. She's been talking about this case since really the Netflix documentary came out, just giving her side of things, talking about the family, talking about her family. And she said she got a sigh of relief when the Ohio Supreme Court, denied her appeal. She really, when I first talked to her, she thinks that Mackenzie needs to spend the rest of her life in prison. Mm-hmm. So it's really devastating time for the family, but also I think a sign of relief for them.
Yeah, and you had an opportunity to hear what she had to say. Tell us about that, or let us know where that's standing right now.
Yeah, I mean, last night she went on her podcast live and, talked about it. She's also started so much surrounding her brother. She even has a foundation going around for her brother. They're having a fundraiser this Saturday benefiting her brother. The foundation's mission right now is to help underprivileged children participate in the sport that her brother loved most, which was basketball. Mm-hmm. She has a petition going around. It's called Dom and Davion's Law, kind of modernizing the Son of Sam's Law, which is because this law that was, made back decades ago, they want to modernize it for the digital era, preventing violent criminals from profiting off of their crimes, which is what she thinks Mackenzie is doing.
Okay. I think we have some of the audio that we've got from that podcast from the family. Let's listen into that now.
At one point, I felt a little relief, but then at the end of the day, my brother's still gone, so there's no relief at all. It's so unfortunate. The whole situation is so unfortunate. I feel, thoughts of sadness for her family. Despite what they've put us through and what they say about us and what they continue to do to our family. Despite all that, I still feel terrible for them because they have a daughter sitting in jail, our sister sitting in jail for probably the rest of her life. But I did have a little bit of a sense of relief for a minute, okay, we're not going to have to sit through another trial right now. You know what I'm saying? And then, that lasted, the feeling of relief lasted just, 20 minutes. And then it was well, Dom's still not with us. So nobody wins.
Yeah, you can really hear it in her voice. This is still so difficult for that family and so difficult for that extended family. You really grieve for them at this point. You touched on this a little bit, Vasi, but good for them in that they're not just wallowing. It's okay to grieve, and I think they need to do that. But they are making a push. They've got a petition that they're trying to get out there, and they want people to hear the story. They want people to understand that there are things that they can do. Tell me about that. What are they up to?
Yeah, this family's been grieving for a long time. This happened back in 2022. And with the Netflix documentary coming out, I think it kind of resurfaced a lot of old wounds because this is a case that's been talked about all around the world. So now Christine, she's pushing back, she's calling on state lawmakers to modernize the state's Son of Sam law, arguing that, it needs to be modernized for the digital era because Mackenzie's doing all these things in prison, trying to get these sponsorships and all this stuff. So I talked to Christine a few weeks back just about the petition coming out. At first it was called Dom's Law, about her brother. Now she's changed the name to Dom and Davion's Law, modernizing that. And it's been I think this petition has grown so much since I first talked to her. You'll see in the story that we're about to toss to just how much this story, or how much signatures that the story has grown.
It's time to relook at these laws.
Christine Russo says the idea came to her just weeks ago, after watching what she calls years of attention around the case that took her brother's life.
So my brother's murderer, who I will not name, she has been obsessed with herself and being social media famous from the very beginning.
The Mackenzie Shirilla case has recently been brought to the public's attention through a new Netflix documentary called The Crash.
Her mom's telling her to write a book. They very much go back and forth, laughing about how famous this case has gotten, things like that. So a couple weeks ago, I was just thinking how I could stop that.
Russo says the pain isn't only the crime, but a culture she says can turn violence into clicks, followers, and money.
Even right after she killed my brother, she laid in a hospital bed making TikToks within hours of killing 2 people.
Her petition calls on Ohio lawmakers to update the state's Son of Sam law, originally written decades ago to stop criminals from profiting through books or media deals.
That was written in the 1970s. So that basically covered like book sales or writing of books, journals, news articles, things of that sort. Now it's 2026 and there's social media.
She says the goal is to stop any profit or perks tied to crime-based notoriety.
No victim's family should have to watch the person who killed their loved one turn that crime into attention, followers, donations, or other personal benefits.
And Russo says the support she's seen so far is helping her family keep pushing forward.
There's hundreds of comments as well. People leaving videos on the site. Strangers, complete strangers that are like leaving, their condolences. Yeah, I'm really happy with how it's going in this short amount of time.
Christine said her mission in life is to be that voice for Dominic and Davion. So far, the petition has more than 17,000 signatures. In Strongsville, Vasi Prokos, 19 News.
All right, so very interesting. In Vasi, since that story, what's changed?
A lot. I mean, when the story I said had more than 17,000 signatures, right now it has more than 172,000 signatures.
Wow.
Big drastic change. This is a way for Christine and the other families to raise awareness, advocate for change, and help make a difference in the next generation. And like I said, be that voice for Dominic and Davion, who can't be the voice for themselves anymore.
Right. All right, so Tara, I know you've got some insight into this and what it is specifically they're trying to do. Take us through that.
Yeah, just a little history, because there is a current law in place, what we call colloquially the Son of Sam law here in Ohio. And that was drafted in the 1970s, though. And what it does is if you are convicted of a violent crime, you cannot profit off of that. But, in the 1970s, we're thinking books, movie deals,
Sure.
that type of thing. And so there have been efforts through the years, especially in 2025, there was an effort to get this updated to extend to GoFundMe, for instance. So crowdfunding. Well, now with Dom and Davion's law, you can monetize. Social media is monetized now. So beyond just a GoFundMe and donations, they're trying to expand that even to social media. And so it is time. This probably does need updated.
Yeah. All right, Tara Coleman and Vasi Prokos, we appreciate both of you and your insights into this. We'll continue to follow this, of course. We've been on top of this story for 4 years now, and we'll continue to do that. All right, thanks for being with us on this Dark Side update as we look at the case that has drawn national attention of Mackenzie Shirilla. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Subscribe now for future episodes and find more Dark Side of the Land and photo galleries related to these cases at cleveland19.com.